Multi-modal Transportation Commission meeting, and Happy New Year. My name is Dave Cronin, City Engineer, and I'm here with Christina Gherkin, who's going to help work alongside Pat Collette, the chair, to facilitate tonight's meeting proceedings. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, when you are not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can turn your video on and off by clicking on the video icon on the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on when you are participating in the meeting. When you are not participating, it is okay to turn your video off. Just remember to turn your video back on when you are participating. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Individuals who registered in advance to provide public comments remotely will be called upon by name. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct them to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each member individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. And to get started, we'll have Christina do the roll call.
Okay. Nick Kuzmyak.
Here.
Damon Baltuska. Aaron Hayden. Trisha Collette.
Here.
Charlie Bryan. And Gregory Crichlow.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and let Pat, Chairperson Pat Collette, kick off the meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Happy New Year, everyone. This is Chairperson Pat Collette, and we have a study session today on receiving the memo on green-colored pavement marking design. And we'll meet from 5 to 6 for that, and then our regular meeting at 6:15. So I'd like to kick off the study session.
All right, thanks. This is Dave Cronin, City Engineer. So attached to the study session, I provided a memo that summarizes what we've looked at for the green colored pavement marking project that was a citizen request in the 2021 budget. The city engaged Alta Planning and Design to do a review of the applicability of green pavement marking for shared use paths as was laid out in the project. And we've got Tobin Bunnell here from Alta who helped do this review for us. And we've attached the memo of the review to this study session item. And I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tobin to kind of give a brief summary of the review that he did, and then I'll provide a recommendation for proceeding with these funds. So with that, Tobin, do you want to go ahead and provide a summary?
Yeah, I can give a real quick synopsis, and we can open it up for questions. And if I need to, we can kind of share screens and and go from there. But if you have the document in front of you, I mean, we go into basically some case studies of where green pavement markings have been used in shared use paths, which was based on the request from the citizen request. And it has been done.
Probably fairly close to if I couldn't.
Excuse me?
Go ahead, Tobin.
Okay. And it has been implemented in certain locations, but the long and short of it is it has been implemented, but it has not been implemented in any uniform manner in any of these examples that we found. And there hasn't been consistent data taken to prove that they're safer one way or another over, let's say, just a regular white continental crosswalk at the same type of shared use path. We also, in the document, around the 7th page of the document, go into the future guidance of the MUTCD, which is really the guiding document of pavement markings nationally. How the language is now, the language has some interpretation to it, which has led to some of the implementations that we've seen across the country. But it sounds like the future language that is being considered for future versions of the MUTCD is going to be a lot more specific, and it's probably going to preclude these type of treatments explicitly, where we're putting green pavement markings within shared use paths, and we lay that out, and then we're kind of concluding that the green pavement markings have a important use for safety in bike crossings, but they need to be specific to where they're going to be denoted as bike crossings and as such. So our basic recommendation was to not have the green pavement markings within shared use path crossings, but there could be some applications where green pavement markings could be applied within the city, and shared use path crossings should be, there's other safety measures that can be taken to make sure everything's visible, so to speak. So that's the long and short of it. I guess, David, I could go into a little bit more specificity, but that's where we were getting to with it, basically with it.
Yep, Dave Cronus, the engineer. Thanks, Tobin. I guess I would say that we appreciate the review on this, and also we see the need to improve safety for bike ped crossings here in Lawrence, and with having this project in the CIP, we have the ability to roll the project over and reallocate the funds to making those improvements. And so, we still see we've heard a lot from the Multi-Modal Transportation Commission in the last year or so on looking at ways to improve crossings. And what we'd like to do is to engage Alta a little further to kind of revise the scope of work to provide some recommendations for pavement marking, not just specific to shared use paths, but other crossings for pedestrians. And currently for crosswalks, we don't have a policy. We have, by practice, we have marked crosswalks at signalized intersections, at roundabouts, in the downtown area, and for safe routes to school crossings. And so I know staff gets requests occasionally from the public to mark crosswalks. A crosswalk doesn't necessarily isn't required to be marked, to be designated a crosswalk, but we don't have a policy to say, well, we're going to mark this crosswalk and not mark that one. So, you know, every intersection that has sidewalks, you know, you could have, you know, four crosswalks. And so we've got thousands of possible crosswalks that could be marked. And so we want to try to create a policy on, you know, where we should be marking crosswalks. In addition to shared use path crossings as well, which are kind of considered crosswalks for intersection crossings. So overall, we'd like to kind of do a little more work in creating a policy for pavement markings. Also look at creating more clear guidelines on retrofitting bike facilities. So our bikeway plan has given us some general guidance based off of speed and volume for putting in bike facilities. We've had some conversations recently on, you know, whether or not to use a conventional bike lane versus a buffered bike lane. And so I think there could be some guidelines that we could kind of drill into to help maybe guide us a little more on making our recommendations for retrofitting bike facilities. And also we've had some conversations previously on improving uncontrolled crossings. We've, by practice, have been kind of following the FHWA STEP guidelines on uncontrolled crossing improvements, and we've been using some RRFBs and curb bump outs and hawk signals. And so I think there's an opportunity to kind of do some work to create some more specific guidelines on that we can adopt and use. And also looking at our design criteria and providing some recommendations on guidelines for crossings at controlled intersections, signalized intersections. And so we're kind of taking the staff recommendation overall is to take this project and the monies to kind of do some of that work that we've talked about a little to make crossing improvements and create policy and guidelines that we can follow to make recommendations and have a more comprehensive project. And so our recommendation would be to do that and to do some of that work, and then to use the remaining funds for this project to go out and make built improvements and to implement markings and crossing improvements. And so overall, that's kind of the summary of this project. So again, we're, you know, tonight just wanted to provide this background info on the review that we've done specific to the CIP project request, and then make a recommendation to move forward to establish some more clear guidelines and policies for crossing improvements. So with that, I would just open it up to any questions or comments from any of the commissioners.
This is Pat Collette, Chair of MMTC. Are there questions or comments from other commissioners? I have a few here, but I want to open it up first. Okay, well, let's start. So Tobin, on the, you know, we're talking about shared use paths and your review of the, you know, the various treatments and some of the cities that have tried it. But I wonder if in some of the reading that I've done, there is although we don't typically make the distinction, there's a distinction between shared use paths and side paths. What I understand is that the side path is typically close to the intersection, and shared use paths are more mid-block often, but we don't distinguish that typically in our language. So I wonder if that has, in your review, if that has any bearing on the different treatments and how that might be implemented, or how that might influence policy development.
That does not. That's kind of picking apart the language a little bit too much. The examples that I pulled, they cover really both. They cover both shared mid-block, what I'll call a mid-block, and those that are at four-way intersections. So but with both of them being shared use being the key, whether they were a side path or a mid-block, wasn't really the distinction that we were talking about, is whether it was a shared use or not. So.
Well, I guess the point of that question is that, some of the complaints about the shared use paths at the intersections have been, kind of the speed at which vehicles come around the corner, and even though there's, in signalized intersections, there are, the white crosshatch crosswalks, that doesn't tend to slow vehicles down very much as they're making a right turn on red, often without much of a stop, and not being visible. So I guess I see the question of safety at an intersection a little bit different than, say, mid-block. I mean, it's still important, but the design of the intersection would seem to have some impact on, what would be an appropriate treatment.
Yeah, and we're, I guess, with the scope that we're the forthcoming scope that David discussed. That last item that he discussed was design recommendations or design guidelines for controlled intersections that would go beyond, that would be in line with industry standard. For instance, we have things called leading pedestrian intervals, where the pedestrian is allowed to go 3 seconds ahead of the green for the vehicular. So the signals are allowed to provide some safety aspect. There's also some protected intersection designs elements that can be incorporated, some geometric elements to intersections that could be considered, that are more in line with industry standard rather than just and also design elements that could separate those paths more. An example we provided in our memo was a shared use path, but it had distinction between where the bikes were traveling and where the peds were traveling, and you can mark that green in the future MUTCD diagram. So there's design elements that we can include in those future guidelines for consideration at intersections that could feed into that. But I do understand where you're going with the question, but I just don't, to say that marking it green or coming up with some green treatment for that side path within an intersection provides a safety benefit. The industry is just not, we don't have the proof to say that right now. So that's kind of where that lands, I suppose.
Thank you. This is Pat Collette, MMTC Chair. You mentioned the case studies and that the data is not there. Do you know if there's any kind of effort in terms of data collection on those types of applications, so that that can be proven or at least discussed one way or another with some data.
A lot of the avenues we were going down were saying they were not collecting that data. Like locally here, where I'm in St. Louis, so locally here, they were not collecting that data for the example that we provided. I had been made to understand that Baltimore is collecting data on theirs, but we didn't get any feedback on what that is. It's not an ongoing process from what I understand. It may not be an ongoing effort given that the future MUTCD may be precluding those efforts. So,
okay. Comments or questions from other commissioners?
Kuzmyak, MMTC. I think I'll jump in at this point. All right, so let's see. I was able to read over all the stuff beforehand, and I got a decent amount of questions here. So if we run out of time, feel free to cut me off, I guess. But I guess my first question is more from a process standpoint. This seems like it should have been an agenda item, not a study session, because we're actively going to be giving feedback on something that is budget related and CIP related. And that to me kind of says general agenda. So I guess what was the thinking for putting this in a study session instead?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. We were not looking for a recommendation under the action item. So it was a study session item because we're receiving this memo on green pavement marking and kind of having a discussion on it, and having a discussion to, because I know a lot of commissioners have brought up questions on design criteria and the applicability of it on projects and crossings. And so I wanted to lay out the scope. I've listened to those questions and concerns and kind of worked with Alta and Tobin to put together the scope of work and to get feedback on it to make sure we're all on the same page. So that's why we put it as the study session.
Understood. Okay. I guess I'm not sure I fully agree because we have had general agenda items that have been regarding consultants and receiving what the progress has been on a certain item and then giving feedback for how things are going to proceed in the future. I feel like it still could have been a general agenda, but it is what it is. As long as we still get a discussion, and I certainly appreciate you following up on those points that we brought up in the past, as well as the other things that are in their scope. I saw that we're also going to be looking at bike lanes during street maintenance and uncontrolled and controlled crossings. So I certainly do appreciate the follow-up there. I had another sort of process question here. Was this a competitive RFP? Is this an on-call service? This thing, I'm just kind of curious how the scope of this came about, and I guess kind of surprised that we're first seeing it this way.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. The city has several consultants that we use for bike ped on-call projects, and so we used one of them, Alta, to do this work. As I think they're in my opinion, subject matter experts in this area, and thought they would be best fit to do this work.
Thanks. I do agree with that. I just wanted to make sure. That was my suspicion that it was an on-call related thing. I feel like it's good for us to kind of know in the future how these might come about. Okay. What else? Let's see. I was gonna say, sorry guys, I have a whole bunch of rules here. All right. So the general gist of the memo that I could tell is that the FHWA prohibits the use of green pavement markings at intersections for anything that is not just a bike path. So that includes shared use paths. I forget if it includes bike lanes or not, but there was something else that was kind of bike related that is not allowed for green pavement markings. But just to make sure I'm clear on what that means, it's only for federally funded projects, right? That doesn't preclude use of green pavement markings on non-federally funded projects. Is that correct?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. Well, whether it's federally funded or non-federally funded, we follow the MUTCD and design guidance on projects. And since there is no guidance or it is not recognized in the MUTCD for crossings, for shared use path crossings or other documents, whether it's federally funded or not, we engineers that approve public improvement plans are responsible for the recommendations and the improvements in the plans. And so I wouldn't treat it any differently, whether it was a federally funded project or a non-federally funded project. If it was within the city, there are different requirements that we have to do with federal funds, but typically design standards, design isn't one of them.
I'm sorry, I muted. Go ahead.
Tobin Bonnell et al. And we had kind of gone into this assuming that, or thinking that our understanding was the FHWA had to give, on a federally funded project, they had to give experimental approval to a treatment like this for it to get approved. And we did find an example down in Georgia where it's on a state route, but we did not find an experimental number assigned to the project necessarily, which was a bit surprising. But we didn't get a whole lot of feedback on what data is being kept on that project, or anything to that effect. We have found that they have not run afoul of the FHWA in doing that. I just don't, again, back to our point, I don't think that they have found that there was any significant benefit to providing those treatments over the typical treatment.
Sorry, I keep accidentally repeating myself. So there's kind of 2 points that I want to continue here. The first one is that there isn't any indication that there is a potential benefit. Based on the case studies that you showed, I would agree with that. But I'm looking at the NACTO website right now, and it has a whole bunch of benefits that it lists that are, they cite certain studies like New York City Department of Transportation, City of Long Beach, looks like Oregon DOT has done this as well. So it looks like NACTO has actually collected the research showing that there are some measurable benefits to green pavement. Admittedly, some of these are pretty old. Some of these are from 2000, so right. But I think it's one of those things where it would be good to really know what the benefit is before we, either invest money in it or say no to green pavement markings altogether. So I think at this point, I would be curious to hear kind of what Sustainability Action Network has to say about this. So we'll get to that later, I think, during public comment. But the other thread I wanted to pick up was the idea that we have to follow MUTCD for everything in the city. And I realize that we definitely have to for any federally funded projects because that's their guidelines. But I mean, there's our design standards that are currently approved by the city also reference NACTO, and NACTO has quite a bit of design guidance that go on green pavement markings that does seem to deviate from what MUTCD says. So since there are other design standards that we have that are kind of developed by the city, such as the minimum curb-to-curb width on a collector street, stuff like that, that's not necessarily an MUTCD. Dave, could you maybe comment on what the leeway is for deviating directly from MUTCD and why it seems that we can do that on some things, but maybe not on this green pavement marking?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Well, I'd like to first address your first point, Commissioner, on green pavement marking. So we're not saying we should not use green pavement markings at all. We're saying we should not. We don't see the benefit in using them for shared use path crossings or side path crossings. We've used green pavement markings on Mass Street for the bike lane crossings. Believe that, and in NACTO, there is guidance for green pavement markings. And so we're not saying not to use green pavement markings at all. So I want to make that really clear. And that it's more, we've reviewed the specific project for shared use path, side path crossings.
Right.
In regards to the MUTCD, that's the manual and uniform traffic control devices, which is a document that's published and used for engineering guidance on all sorts of traffic control related things. There's a chapter on markings, pavement markings. And so in that there are shalls, there are shoulds and mays. So if it's shall, then we are required to follow that. If it's should, it's strongly recommended. And so you would want to have a reason not to do it. Justification not to do it. I think when we review things that say should here at the city, we generally follow that guidance. And then may is open to interpretation or engineering judgment. And so that's how we use the MUTCD for pavement markings.
But just to be clear, MMTCD only legally applies for federally funded projects, right? For everything else, it's sort of like the International Building Code in that it's there if you want to comply with it. But unless there's a project that directly requires that for doing the project, you're technically able to adopt your own standards, which is why we have city design standards, right?
This is Dave Cronstein, engineer. The MUTCD does not apply just to federally funded projects. It applies to all projects in public right-of-way.
Okay, I think that was the point of understanding I wasn't quite getting. It seemed like it was one of those things where you have to follow it where the government gets involved, but where a municipality can set their own standards, there is some leeway. So okay, I understand. So in that case, just to kind of recap this discussion, because FHWA says in the MUTCD that it is recommended or you can use green pavement markings for specifically bike paths. Sweet, we're good to go on that one. But since it explicitly prohibits the use of green pavement markings on shared use path crossings, then we're not feeling comfortable going against that prohibition. Is that, do I understand that correctly? Or have I missed something? Sorry.
Dave Cronstein, engineer, I would ask you to repeat that question so I'm sure I can respond.
I'll do my best. And I'm not really sure I have it fully down yet, but I'm hoping we can get there because I have a feeling I may not be the only one who's not quite understanding it. So in the MUTCD, which that we've now established covers all roads in the public or all projects in the public right of way, they do allow, it's more of a should than a shall. They do allow green pavement markings on bike lane and bike path crossings. Is that part correct?
Correct.
Okay. But the second part is that they prohibit green pavement markings on shared use paths because it's not exclusively bike. Is that correct? Or is there a little bit of leeway there? Because other cities have done this. So, and not all of them were a pilot program. So I'm trying to see how shant is it exactly?
Tobin, do you want to take this?
Yeah, the language right now is not that explicit. It's not totally explicit, but we have, with the future guidance that they put out in December 2020, that last part of our report we're detailing, they're getting that language to be more explicit to where, yeah, it's going to be, you shall not. And to back up what Dave was saying about the MUTCD, there's liability concerns. An engineer could go against the MUTCD, but they would want to have the data and some engineering backup just in case something bad happened. It's kind of a backup document for engineering decisions.
So then for these cities that have done these pilot projects on shared use paths, have all of them received this kind of provisional acceptance, or was that just St. Louis? I guess, how did they get away with it is what I'm asking.
Well, it's to a degree there's engineering judgment because the MUTCD wasn't getting completely explicit And then you had that backup with the NACTO document that was kind of being even less explicit, and just so there's some engineering judgment that was applied. The city of Baltimore did produce a document, but even that document had the language wasn't as explicit as I would want it to be. So.
Okay. Well, guys, I certainly appreciate you kind of educating me on exactly what's going on, because as a non-traffic engineer, I'm an engineer, but not that kind. I'm still kind of learning exactly what governs and exactly what we can kind of get away with, what's flexible, what is very inflexible. So it sounds like then that it's currently not explicit that you can't do green pavement markings on SUPs, but it is definitely going in that direction. And that's something I can sympathize with. So, okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. I'll back off for a bit so somebody else can jump in with a comment. So I've been monopolizing for a while. Thank you all.
Other commissioners? Any other comments? I guess I'll put another one in. This is Collette, Chair MMTC, and kind of referring to the recommendation on the change of scope on the CIP. And it looked like when I read that, I have to go back and read it a little more carefully, I guess, but it sounded like the idea was reallocating funds to do this study and develop design guidelines and policies, and then to also be able to proceed with with additional markings out of those funds. So the question I have is a couple of them. One is generally how much money would be left to actually do the painting on the recommended projects. And then the second is, and I didn't pull up the original list of projects that was in that original CIP, but I think some of those are bike lanes, or bike facilities. And would you anticipate going ahead with green pavement using those funds basically at the same time that we're doing the study for the policy development? And I guess that's directed to Dave.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. So the project in the current project, the allocation is $382,000. I would, the majority of that will be spent on implementation of improvements. We haven't finalized the final scope and fee with Alta, but it will be under $50,000 for the scope of policy and guidance work. And so I would say 80 to 90% of the funds would be spent on built improvements, whether it's green pavement marking or white pavement marking. If we decide we want to start marking shared use path crossings with white pavement marking, that we could do a lot of work and make a lot of improvements with that money. Mm-hmm. And I think the white pavement marking we will get, as we've seen, there hasn't been any studies that said there's a discernible increase in safety with green versus white side path crossings. We will, the white pavement marking is usually it's less expensive and easier to put down, and we can make address a lot more crossings with white. Or we can also look at improving markings for bike lanes at intersections or crossings with green pavement marking. So it could be a combination of both, really. And I think that's going to be part of the challenge overall is, to kind of look at the criteria and develop a policy, and then just see what the overall need is in the city, how if we follow the policy, what the overall cost is to implement it and to maintain it. And so that's the other challenge. And I can tell you that we have been strained with our budget for pavement markings and just keeping up with all of our pavement markings, crosswalks, long lines, lane markings. And so I think we have a ways to go in that area too. So I think, overall, it's part of our asset management plan is to put out improvements and maintain them. So there's a lot of work there.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, we've been talking all year about getting these policies developed, to help those decisions and, to be able to have some resources that get that for us and that we can move forward. I'm really supportive of that, but I think, Nick, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC. I just wanted to bring that up with Dave before we get too far off the topic. So, Dave, you mentioned that we've been constrained on the budget for pavement markings, lane striping, all that jazz for a while now. And I guess what I was just curious about, I don't know if you've kind of alluded to this already or not, but regardless of how we deal with green pavement markings or any kind of upgrades to crossings in the first place, what's the plan for making sure they stay maintained? Is there going to be is this 382,000 set up kind of like a trust fund where we spend some on CapEx and some on OpEx in the future? Or are we just going to hope that City Commission can allocate some more funds to the, striping and maintenance budget to make sure that the green stays? Because it sounds like it fades almost quicker than the white pavement. So I guess I'm just have a few concerns over the longevity of whatever plans we decide on.
Yes, this is Dave Cronz, the engineer. I have the same concerns. We want to be able to maintain anything that we put out there. And so that's, if we're going to be establishing new crosswalk markings, we need to fund appropriate dollars in our maintenance budget to maintain those and determine the life cycle cost and how many years we get out of the markings and how often they need to be refreshed. So yeah, that's something we need to be thinking about as we move forward with this.
Is that going to be under the scope of what Alta's doing? It sounds like there's going to be a whole bunch of recommendations, not just for, where and if we can use green pavement markings, but what the alternative to that might look like to highlight safety crossings, which I'm really glad to see is in there. I feel like this is not a no, it's sort of a no, but, which is, good enough, right? So in that case, Tobin, for the rest of your scope, is there an inclusion for, how to deal with long-term concerns here?
Yeah, we'll have material. We can give you some material recommendations as far as that goes. But yeah, but there's always going to be cost considerations. Like if you go with green MMA, we have found that it has pretty good longevity, but it's pretty expensive. So we can go down that. Yeah, we're keeping all these things within the document to policy recommendations for consideration of the city. So we can give some material recommendations within the policy recommendations as well.
Sounds good. Thanks for the explanation.
Okay, I'd like to, unless there are additional comments from commissioners, I'd like to open it up to a public comment. Is there any public comment here online? Yes, Michael Almond.
Hi, thank you, Chair Collette. This is Michael Almond with Sustainability Action Network. First off, I appreciate Commissioner Kuzmyak's questions and concerns, but I would like to express my own concern and request that this item be deferred until the next meeting. For the second month in a row, the city engineer has blocked off our comments from sustainability action on this item. There's a 9-page document that was submitted within the deadline this morning at 16 minutes to noon, and it is not in your packet. Our whole position is expressed in that, and I'm not prepared to defend it to any detail within 3 minutes if you haven't had a chance to read it.
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. Mr. Allman, I shared the document with all of the commissioners and attached it to the agenda at around 2 o'clock today.
Well, I received no email notification from the city that the agenda was updated. I've opened that agenda a number of times. I've refreshed my browser. It's not on the agenda.
This is Pat Collette, Chair of MMTC. Michael, I did receive an email with that notification that your, that memo was there and read it. And I see Nick's looking at the agenda online and he's seeing it there. So I don't know if there's an issue with how it's showing up. I don't know how to answer that, but we as commissioners did get it, and it is on the agenda.
Well, okay, I apologize if that's the case. I don't understand why I didn't get notification and why it doesn't show up on the agenda that I look at. Like I say, I've refreshed it. I've shut off the computer and rebooted. Nothing shows up on the agenda. Be that as it may, I apologize if something technically has gone wrong. I don't know what to make of that. If you would, and hopefully maybe you have been able to read it in some detail, I would like to take my 3 minutes to go over some of the items.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, well, sorry for that delay. I guess I'm not really sure what the question I would ask of whether we would want to have green pavement markings for shared use paths or not is why not? I mean, if Federal Highway and NACTO and Mutkud and any number of guides show all the benefits of visibility, of predictability, of user placement and movement, like Commissioner Kuzmyak pointed out, there's many benefits there. The main being visibility, which is also cited in the Lawrence Bikes plan. Improving on the expectation of drivers that there may be bicyclists approaching, and bicyclists approach sometimes at 20, 25 miles an hour. There are definitely benefits. So my question would first of all be, why not? If there's a problem with federal funding on a project, I would think an easy workaround would be you get the project funded, you get it built, and then you issue an RFP for a pavement marking contract separate from the construction contract. It's not rocket science. We can do this. There's many benefits. You have a lot of leeway. The City Commission already has signed on to $382,000, and all the projects at 151 locations in the proposal that we came up with 2 years ago are shared use paths, and the City Commission wants to do them there. I would venture that having funded that and having wanted that project done, the City Commission may consider the city engineer's refusal to do the project in 2021 when it was scheduled is possibly insubordination. I won't legally, say one way or the other, but it sure is odd to me when the city commission has instructed staff to build this. The city commission will need to be convinced that we want to have a policy here instead of their green pavement markings. And if the Multimodal Transportation Commission endorses this switcheroo by the city engineer, they're going to need to be convinced, and having your endorsement is what the city engineer needs to make them change their mind. That's what's going on here. I would suggest that if we want to come up with a policy, and I've been pushing for a policy in this for a long time, that we do that, but it's not in lieu of building the project that the city commissioners funded for 2021. There's good reason. Oh, I know. The city engineer basically told me that he wants to do green pavement markings, which you heard him say, but he doesn't want to do them in shared use paths because, as I wrote in my comments, they are not bikeways. That's in spite of the fact that bicycles use them, and bicycles are intended to use a shared use path, and he said, so therefore green pavement markings are not appropriate for SUPs because they're not a bikeway. Well, that's really splitting hairs. And irregardless, we know the benefits for any kind of bikeway crossing, which I consider a shared use path, logically a bikeway. We know the benefits. There's no reason not to do it. Even if MUCTAD gets their wording changed to make it more explicit, Federal Highway has said right now it's an interim interpretation from 2008. We have the ability to do it right now. We could put those pavement markings in right now, legally, without any repercussions. So that's why we recommend that you not endorse the city engineer trying to do an end run around the city commission's instructions to install those pavement markings. Yes, go ahead with, coming up with a policy. We'd like to see that, but not to preclude putting in those green pavement markings. So that's enough to say for right now. And I appreciate your patience with my browser. I don't know what it was. So thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. NACTO was written primarily, the primary author is Alta Planning. And if you saw in your document, Alta Planning proposed green pavement markings at the shared use path on 19th Street where it crosses Osdall. Remember the Bicycle Boulevard project? That project. Alta Planning proposed that. It's in your document, it's in your packet. It wasn't installed because of funding cuts, but Alta Planning with the NACTO guide is in favor of this in a number of ways. So thank you anyway. That's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other public comment online? Or Dave, is there anyone there in person?
This is Dave Cronitz, the engineer. No, there is no one here in person.
Any last comments from commissioners?
This is Commissioner Bryan. I have some comments I'd like to share now that we've had the public comments. I think that the direction that staff wants to go with this seems important to me. I mean, we've talked about the need to prioritize intersection safety or crossing safety. That comes up all the time for us. And so it feels like this is a step in the direction of trying to improve our policies around crossing safety. I am a little concerned about the way that we've gotten there, but nonetheless, I think with the outcome that I assume is going to come from this, it will contribute to the betterment of our work, I believe. I would be curious if the crossing safety, if the scope of this is going to be limited primarily to pavement markings, or if it could be thought of more expansively to consider crossing safety. And that might include things such as raised crossings and other methods of improving the safety for people that are crossing our streets. I think what's maybe missing, and this just might not be the within the scope, might be more appropriate for staff to develop this. There was discussion earlier about the unfunded needs around pavement markings, and yet there's not anything in the scope that would help us to define some prioritization scheme for how we might think about allocating funds, such as to shared use paths or safe routes to school crossings or crossings on arterial streets, etc. So I think that's just a noticeable omission, perhaps intentional, maybe not. Maybe there's some way that the consultant could at least provide some considerations for how prioritization might be done. And then in that same section, there could be some consideration for ongoing maintenance costs to kind of address a concern that was brought up earlier. I think that covers it. I would like to know, I think what's missing in the discussion is, how long is this going to take, and what would be the use of the funds that were set aside for this green crossing or green pavement marking project. It sounds like they're just going to be on hold for some unknown period of time. Maybe, is that going to be within this year, or is it 2023? That'd just be helpful to know that. And that's all I had, really. Okay. Those are my comments.
Yeah, Dave Krantz, the engineer, to answer the question on timeline, we would expect that to occur in this year, 2022, to develop criteria and policy, and then to put together a project or projects for implementation.
So, Dave, are you expecting then that we would see at some point later this year a list of projects to expend whatever remaining funds there are?
Dave Krantz, the engineer, yes, I do. And in the scope, I guess to hop back to your other question, Commissioner Bryan, we're also reviewing other improvements other than pavement markings at intersections. So that could be other built improvements and where to put in raised crossings or RFBs, other treatments. And we have thought about that too, about the prioritization. I think that's another step that we need to, that's something that we need to consider, how we prioritize the improvements as well, and how we fund them. So we've thought about that a little, and I think that's something we can talk a little bit with Alta on what maybe they've done previously in other communities and strategies for trying to on the implementation side. So there may be some costs for design of whatever plans we put together for implementation as well. But I think that we can. I don't want to tie us down to a timeline or schedule, but I would say within the next 3 to 6 months, have the policy complete so that we can put together a project list and in the latter half of this year.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I think if this can lead us to the point where we have crossing improvements identified and estimates put in place, similar to what we've done with the PED projects and the bike projects, that would be a huge step forward. And then we'd have to discuss, how do we balance the funds that have been allocated by the City Commission? How do we balance that across intersection safety and bike and PED improvements? I think intersection safety, to me, is probably one of the more, when it comes to funding, it's the thing that really would matter. But that's a future discussion for our whole commission, I suppose. But if this can help us with that, I think that would be a great, great work to be done.
Kuzmyak, MMTC. Pat and Dave, quick question. It's 6:04. I realize we don't have much on the main agenda, but would it be acceptable to extend this a little bit until we're kind of done? Or do we have to cap it?
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, is that we agree to extend it at least till 6:15 so that we can kind of finalize the comments and kind of determine next steps, and then start the regular meeting at 6:30. Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay, we'll go ahead then. Other comments? Nick, did you have another comment?
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC. I had a couple I wanted to go over now that we've kind of reached the end game here. So I would like to kind of respond to Mr. Allman's comments about green pavement markings. As I understand it, it's not so much that, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not so much that you don't want green pavement for SUP crossings because they're not bikeways. It's more that we would be going against the grain of MUTCD, which, though that prohibition isn't currently explicit, is very likely to be explicit in the coming years. Is that correct?
Dave Cronen's the engineer. I can't say it's going to be explicit or not, but it's not a treatment that's used. It's not a for shared use pass.
I understand. I feel like, at least for me, I'm kind of rationalizing this similar to, in my line of work, how we deal with nutrient regulations. It always seems like they're going to be right around the corner. And even though they may not be coming this year, they may come, in 2 or 3 years. And that's very likely the direction that, treatment plants will have to go, right? So it sounds like that the sort of tide is turning against where green pavement can be and where it should not be. And at this point, I would say I do support following what MUTCD is suggesting and probably going towards, even if they're not explicitly there yet. So I just want to make sure that was clear, that that's not some, it's not necessarily ideological. It's more just kind of reading the writing on the wall. So I also wanted to piggyback up what Charlie said about expanded scope. And this is probably in the weeds, but since we're here and it's a study session and we're discussing stuff, may as well jump into it. So since this is an on-call project anyway, I guess, could we have a broader discussion, including MMTC, of what we want to accomplish here? Because I like where we are. I mean, the 4 scope items are really good. I wonder, could we do more? Could we expand the scope to consider maybe long-term maintenance, actually writing the policy, stuff like that? I mean, since there wasn't necessarily an RFP, that means that there's not really a scope that has to be stuck with, right?
Dave Cronen's the engineer. I don't know exactly what you're asking. We kind of presented a scope of work, and so I don't know if there's something that you think that's not in there that you're thinking about. Let me know.
Yeah, so the specific thing I was trying to make clear, and I don't think I've done a good job of that, is what to do about the future of stuff. So I think at this point, Alta's scope says, let me bring it up real quick. So we're going to have a formal draft recommended policy and design guideline report. So I guess it'd be good to kind of discuss, exactly what we expect to see out of that. We have, recommendations on where green pavement marking should go based on current laws, guidelines, and standards. But I think we were discussing earlier, how to fund this stuff in the future and make sure that it doesn't degrade like all the other pavement markings that have. So it seems like there may be some room for adding additional items to kind of round out the discussion of just highlighting the crossings of multi-modal paths and roadways. So I don't know if that's really necessary exactly, but it seems like there might be some room for addition. And I guess the reason I bring it up is that the other three scope items, they don't seem to be directly related to the CIP. The CIP project, from where the budget is coming from to fund the study. And I don't know if that's necessarily wrong or right, but it just doesn't seem like it's necessarily in the spirit of what that project was intending. I'm not saying that the scope items are bad, and I'm really glad to see them. I just wonder if it's appropriate to fund them based on budget that was meant for something else. And I guess the reason I ask that is that even though Alta is composed of SMEs who have done great work for us in the past, coming up with these additional scope items that were, let me see if I can get it right here, the controlled and uncontrolled intersections and also bike lanes during street maintenance projects, these seem like things that staff, MMTC, and MPO have actually taken care of in the past in-house. Things like non-motorized project prioritization plan, safe routes to school prioritization, sidewalk repair prioritization, the shared micromobility policy. We've done a decent amount of this stuff in-house thanks to your guys' hard work to get it done. And it seems like since this does depend on local conditions, that it could be appropriate to kind of redirect that effort in-house. Now I understand there is the concern of your department's actual bandwidth and ability to do it given staff resources. So I guess I'd be curious to see where you stand, Dave, on if that would be possible. And I'm kind of assuming that it's not, and that's why it's in their scope, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Dave Cronus, the engineer, I think to move this forward, my recommendation is to use a consultant to help us that has the experience and the expertise and quite frankly, the time to do it. I don't know if we have the capacity to do it and deliver it in a quick manner.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. That's kind of what I figured. I just wanted to make sure. I mean, am I correct that this is stuff that technically we could do in-house given the bandwidth though?
This is Dave Cronus, the engineer. Yeah, we could certainly develop a lot of things, policies and procedures in-house. I think we can do plans in-house as well, but we do want to try to use consultants to help out, supplement our work as we got a lot of workload in delivering projects. And so, for this and given Alta's experience in this area, I think that was my recommendation to engage them to help us. And so that it is someone from the outside and not just myself as well. So I think it's also good to get feedback from external consultants. So
understood.
There will be some staff work as well. We will be involved in this, and when it comes down to the maintenance and maintaining and the need, there will certainly be some staff time and involvement. So it is not like we're giving it all to them. This will be there'll be a lot of work here.
Could you maybe explain the next steps in this? I think I understand what the next steps are for scope item 2.1, but for the other three, are we going to be seeing that in upcoming study sessions or general agenda items, or what's the plan there?
Yeah, Dave Cronus, engineer. I think we anticipate bringing back a draft of the recommendations to the MMTC. I don't have a timeline on it. We got to get this finalized and get a contract to move forward. But I would anticipate bringing back a draft to the MMTC. I don't know if it'll be study session or regular agenda right now, but at some point before we finalize anything, we would bring it back.
Okay.
So I think that is in the scope.
Sounds good.
This is Commissioner Collette. As far as the scope goes, there were a couple of, I mean, these are maybe fairly minor, but just in terms of getting the scope finalized on your end, I want to just have the opportunity to make a couple of comments on that. One was in 2.1, it says the city will be allowed to provide one response of consolidated comments. That's kind of in the second paragraph. And, I just looking at a draft report and then sending, recommendations back, it seems like, having another opportunity to look at it one more time before the final project is made or is developed on that particular task, that would be beneficial, because you don't know, one, you're giving some comments, but not knowing what that next iteration looks like, unless there's, something in the final report option. But it seems like really that's to be done in the draft report. So I guess I would just recommend having a chance for responding to it twice. But and then there's just a couple of places, particularly in 2.4, about where it references pedestrian crossings, pedestrian accommodations, and I would just like for those to recognize pedestrians and bicycles from bicyclists. Yeah, I think that was the intent, but to have that included in the language.
We'll look at that.
This is Commissioner Bryan. Before we finish, there's just one other thing occurred to me while I was listening to Nick. This kind of gets to the question of what's the scope. As we do this work, one thing that I think we always struggle with is how do we know we're making progress? And other than getting through a project list, funding projects we identify as important, I'm wondering if there's any other performance measures that would be useful in regard to intersection safety. And if there's any information the consultant might be able to provide in the report that would help us with kind of furthering our goals to measure and track progress on such an important thing to all of us in our community.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Collette. I think going back to that discussion early on in terms of the other green pavement projects in other cities and no data. And that is, that has been a priority for us to look at performance measures and integrated with the strategic plan. And I agree with you, Charlie, that, having that built in and having recommendations on how to measure the improvement in safety. Okay, any other last comments before we adjourn?
Kuzmyak, MMTC. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, this is Commissioner Baltuska. Sorry, I can't get my video to cooperate with me. I just wanted to ask, I know that, we went back and forth on, green pavement markings. We understand that those aren't going to be the recommendations for shared use paths. But I was just curious if, would there be a recommendation for any sort of like white paint, or, it doesn't necessarily have to be green paint, and that's fine. I'm just curious if we envision any of those improvement recommendations having any paint at all, or the recommendation is going to be, other measures like signage, or, I'm just curious if any paint at all is going to end up being one of the recommendations.
Yeah, and I can answer that. This is Tobin at Alta. We cover a lot of different things in the scope, and I think that it depends on which application you're talking about, but I think we're going to have kind of a hierarchy. If we're talking about uncontrolled mid-block crossings, for instance, we'll have kind of a hierarchy of improvements that could be made based on the conditions that are there, with one of the first and foremost of those probably being white pavement markings. And I think what we can do with policy is provide a standardization of what those white pavement markings should look like across the city.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kuzmyak. MMTC. Damon, sorry for cutting you off earlier. I just wanted to jump in with one final comment and say I really appreciate, Dave, you kind of taking the initiative here to make this work and find a solution to, improve crossing safety, at least in some way, whether or not that be green markings or not. So, I don't want all the slings and arrows for me to be misconstrued as not appreciative of the effort. I think even if we don't, fully agree on how we got to this point, I think it's going to be, definitely an improvement as a result. So glad to see it and excited to see where this goes.
All right, thank you. Okay, it's 6:20, so let's adjourn and reconvene at 6:30. Does that give everyone enough time if we come back at 6:30? Okay, great. We'll see you then.
Sure.
reconvene the commission. And everybody have a chance to get back to their chairs.
This is Dave Cronus, the engineer. I wanted to mention one thing while everyone's kind of getting back here online. We are having some issues with the live stream on YouTube. So the meeting is still being recorded and it's being broadcast on channel 25, but the YouTube live stream, we're having some technical difficulties. So the meeting's still being recorded. It will be posted to YouTube following the meeting, but did want to mention that.
Thank you.
And we're ready here on our end if you're ready. And
Yeah.
Christina, we can start with a roll call.
Okay. Start with roll. Nick Kuzmyak,
Here.
Damon Baltuska.
Here.
Aaron Payton,
Here.
Pat Collette,
Here.
Charlie Bryan,
Here.
and Gregory Crichlow.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is Commissioner Collette. I'd like to call the January 3rd meeting of Multimodal Transportation Commission to order. And to start off with approving the December 6th meeting minutes. Any comments or changes?
This is Commissioner Bryan. I move to accept the December minutes.
Okay, thank you. Bryan moves. Is there a second?
Kuzmyak, MMTC, a second.
Okay, all in favor. Christina, you want to call the vote?
Okay. Okay, Nick Kuzmyak,
Aye.
Damon Baltuska,
Aye.
Aaron Payton,
Yes.
Pat Collette,
Yes.
Charlie Bryan,
Yes.
and Gregory Crichlow is absent. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. I don't see anyone online, but is there public comment? Yes, Chris Flowers.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I'm just what I want to talk about are the speed bumps on at 23rd and Massachusetts. It's the two that go that if you're going to Haskell University, you come across them. Basically, well, one problem I have with them is the safety that the speed bumps are slowing down emergency response times. But I know like the fire trucks, I think they come through over off of Barker. But today I thought, well, I was just curious, like what kind of like how many emergency calls are coming from Haskell. So on Twitter, I looked up our community police scanner and like the word Haskell, and I found 4 emergency calls, but and I was just thinking that the dorms, but what's on Massachusetts is the Haskell Health Center. And I saw that there was 4 in the past year coming from there. And one of them was a cardiac arrest, code blue CPR in progress. So I was just thinking, should we be having speed bumps on streets that are just right? I mean, it's like the same block about, maybe a couple blocks down, but from the Haskell Health Center, where people are probably going to be having emergency, medical emergencies throughout the year. I think those speed bumps, I think they're going to potentially kill more people than they're going to save. And also the other problem I have with it, I was just curious, when they were originally built, was any kind of outreach done to towards Haskell to the students living in Blaylock and Row Cloud. I think there's another dorm over there. I mean, they have to go over those speed bumps if they're leaving their dorms. And I don't think it's a good issue of equity if the students living at Haskell who have to go over those speed bumps, if they weren't included in the discussion when they were originally built. And I say this because I've worked with some Haskell students and none of them have liked those speed bumps. And so just in closing, I think they're going to do more damage, especially because that Haskell Health Center is on that same street. And also, when it comes to getting there, they might take Barker, but if someone has to be transported to the hospital, are they going the direction from Barker or are they going up Mass to transport someone to the hospital from the health center? So I would just like y'all to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment? Don't see anyone online, and I assume, Dave, there's no one there.
Dave Cruntz, the engineer. No one is present here.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that's to receive nominations and elect chair and vice chair for 2022. And to start off with, I would like to open nominations for 2022 transportation chair to the commission members.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I nominate Nick Kuzmyak for the position of chair.
Okay, and each person who's nominated can accept or decline the nomination. So Nick, are you accepting?
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC, I accept.
Okay, thank you. Any other nominations? Okay, no other nominations. Nominations for chair are closed. All in favor for Commissioner Kuzmyak as 2022 Transportation Commission chair, say aye. We'll take a roll call here. Either aye or no. Christina, can you do that roll
Nick
call?
Kuzmyak,
Aye.
Raymond Baltuska,
Aye.
Aaron Payton,
Aye.
Pat Collette,
Aye. Aye.
and Charlie Bryan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Nick, for stepping up, and I know your leadership will be great for the coming year. Appreciate that. All right. Now the next. So I need to, let's see. Okay, I'm handing over the chair duties to you, Nick. So now you can follow that same process for vice chair election.
Kuzmyak, MMTC. Yeah, that is a pretty jarring transition, but
I know. I remember that from last year.
That's what we signed up for. All right. Sounds good. Well, in that case, at this point, I would like to open nominations for the vice chair of the Multimodal Transportation Commission for the year 2022. Do I have any nominations?
This is Commissioner Bryan. I nominate Damon Baltuska for the position of vice chair.
Commissioner Baltuska, do you accept the nomination?
Yeah, I'll accept that nomination.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominations for vice chair from the commission? Okay, hearing none. See if I remember from 20 seconds ago. Do we need a motion? I guess all in favor. Christina, can you please call roll call to nominate or to elect Commissioner?
One more time. Who nominated?
Charlie Bryan.
Charlie. Okay. Just making sure.
Nick, the only thing you need to say is, in addition, is nominations for the co-chair are closed. This formality.
I hereby close nominations for the co-chair.
Yeah. Or I guess for vice chair.
Vice chair. Yeah. That's what we're calling it. Okay. In that case, I think now we're good. Christina, can you please call the roll?
Nick Kuzmyak,
Aye.
Damon Baltuska,
Aye.
Aaron Payton,
Aye.
Pat Collette,
Aye.
and Charlie Bryan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you. Nick Kuzmyak, Chair of MMTC. In that case, our next agenda item is staff items. Dave, what do you got for us?
Yep, Dave Cronin, city engineer. I do not have any staff items. Nothing on the agenda. I would say we are working to get the retreat planned. And we had a meeting right before Christmas, a kickoff meeting, and so I think we sent out a survey to try to identify a date. We don't have all the responses back yet, but we're working on that, and so we'll follow up with the board on that and move forward. That's all I have. Thanks.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Thanks for that quick update. I regret that I couldn't make it to the actual retreat planning meeting last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago. Jeez. But it sounds like there may be another one to hammer out details, if I'm not mistaken. So, all right, well, that's it for staff items. Next on the agenda is commission items. Looks like we have our PTAC update boilerplate in here. Commissioner Crichlow is not present, and I'm not actually on PTAC anymore, but I'll do my best to update because I was at the meeting at least. So for the last meeting of the year, we had the same strategic plan discussion from Craig Owens as we did here as well. And let's see, we appointed somebody to the T2050 or Transportation 2050 Steering Committee. What I thought was the most interesting was that Adam Weigel, the Transit and Parking Administrator, put together a kind of a list of accomplishments that PTAC did over the course of 2021. So that included items that we decided on, committees people served on, either internally to the committee or externally as kind of a mixed group, and also what kind of big discussions were brought up over the course of the year. I thought it was pretty cool. I don't know if that was just Adam's idea and he decided to put it together for 2021. Maybe he had a lot of free time on his hands. I highly doubt that. But I think it's a really good, potential year-end kind of roundup document that would be kind of helpful for some committees. Now, recognizing that staff has limited bandwidth, I'm not going to come out and say that, I think every committee needs to have this, but I would encourage you to go through I'm just going to post the link in the chat right here, actually, if anybody wants to read it. So here is the list of accomplishments that I thought was really nice to go over, because I often struggle to remember even what exactly happened 2 or 3 meetings ago. So to cap it for the entire year was particularly helpful, especially for planning next year, because I don't know if PTAC still has retreats or not. I don't believe they do. Any thoughts from the commission on that?
Yeah, Nick, Commissioner Collette, we did have that, the whole list of accomplishments at the retreat last year, and that's on the tentative agenda for this year. And I know that staff put together, quite a few of those items, and then I can't remember if others, contributed to it, but I think that's probably as part of the subcommittee to help, add those items in. And so I think that was the intent. And there was I remember there's a good long list from last year in the retreat. So is that your recollection, Dave?
Yeah, yes, Dave Cronin, the engineer. Yeah, when we put together the agenda for the retreat last year, we talked a lot about accomplishments and then goal setting. So yeah, we kind of, in our kickoff meeting for the retreat here for this round, we kind of talked about doing The same thing.
So this is Commissioner Bryan. Nick, thanks for bringing this up. I really, I had seen that update about PTAC accomplishments, and I appreciated it. One thing I would throw out there that might have been also helpful is to see kind of a list of accomplishments from transit more broadly, because there's a lot of great progress that was made this last year in transit. And I think while this, document maybe was focused on the accomplishments of the committee, that was their contributions were made in the context of other changes that transit made. And I think it would have been nice to see that maybe juxtaposed. Here's what the committee did, here's what staff was able to do. And, from the community's perspective, they probably saw it differently. So just thinking about how do you speak about accomplishments from the perspective of the community, while also acknowledging the unique or specific contributions that the committee made. I think if we were to do something similar for multimodal, there would be a lot of things we might want to point to that we would see as progress that were primarily driven by staff, but I think would be helpful for the community to see the importance of transportation planning and the work that, we're part of. So I always appreciate having more context, I suppose. So that would be my kind of enhancement to suggest for if we're going to do something similar.
Any other comments from the commission? The Kuzmyak MMTC chair. In that case, I'd like to kind of follow up on those. Pat and Dave, thank you for reminding me. I had completely forgotten that was a part of the retreat last year. I guess a year is a long time all of a sudden. So yeah, you are correct. That does sound very familiar that we did do an accomplishment list. But Charlie, what you were saying about kind of getting the broader context of what did MSO do? What did transit do? Because oftentimes that there are things that we're not involved with, but still benefit the community. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of toot that horn. And also, that's the kind of thing that I feel like would be really useful to bring to an organization like LAND, for example, or even, I'm sure you guys probably have some communications to the city commission and city manager to say like, here's the justification for this group, but also here's why, the staff was also really important in kind of moving the city forward this year. So I don't know if there's any further discussion on that, but I think it might be something good to discuss during the retreat, perhaps, on how we could improve this and make it more useful for everybody. Okay, moving on to the next preset commission item, we have the Transit Route Redesign Committee update. Commissioner Bryan, what do you have for us?
So the committee did not meet last month, so no new updates.
Okay, thanks. I'll give a quick thing on the pedestrian plan update. We are scheduled to meet on January 20th to go over, I believe, the draft pedestrian plan update and provide comments, have a discussion. There may be a follow-up meeting the week after that, but it's not set in stone just yet. So unfortunately, I won't be there at the meeting, so the vice chair is going to host it, but I will do my best to participate in the background and continue to provide feedback, although Commissioner Crichlow is also on the steering committee. So I have faith that he'll be able to provide some useful comments as well. Next one is Board Review and Performance Measure Committee update. Who has a update on that one?
This is Commissioner Collette. I'll provide an update at the retreat. Well, with our presentation study session last month with the city manager and the discussion of the strategic plan, the city's strategic plan, and that was this effort with the performance measures and committee. We had kind of put that, shelved that item until we could see what the strategic plan looked like and where the performance measures were embedded in that strategic plan. So what we talked about at the kickoff meeting for the retreat was looking at that again within within MMTC and discussing performance measures, KPIs, both with MPO and city manager's office. So the committee has not met, but the intent, I think, was that we were just delaying the action from that committee, and that we would like to, that would be something that gets worked on in 2022, starting with the retreat.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. That sounds kind of similar to what we did at the retreat in 2021 as well, was to, define how we can set our goals such that they align with the strategic plan. So I think it's good to start to make that sort of an annual, item to make sure that we're staying up to date, both with our own goals and the strategic plan. Okay. Any other commission items? Okay. If not, I just wanted to quickly address the public comment from earlier from Mr. Flowers and note that with regard to the concern of emergency vehicles and first responders having issues with speed bumps, what Dave kind of explained to me last time on the Walker Reese Drive thing was that there are pretty specific standards, engineering design standards, with exactly how speed bumps and other traffic calming devices need to be structured, and the geometry of them and the placement and their appropriateness of use, such that emergency responders don't have to, be delayed too much by their implementation. Dave, is that correct?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. That is correct, and we consult with emergency services, fire and police on traffic calming that's permanently installed. So.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I just wanted to make sure to set the record straight and kind of close that discussion item to make sure that we're all on the same page. So thanks for the explanation. Next up is item G, the MMTC calendar for 2022. So I've not been super involved in making this stuff yet, but since everything from February to December of next year is wide open, this agenda item will get a lot more interesting in the coming months. So Dave, is there anything of note? And Pat, on your side, is there anything that we need to look at for now?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. I don't have anything. I haven't plugged anything in for February. Typically, we have the retreat and start planning the year out. And if we don't have anything for February, we may end up canceling that meeting. But we'll get together with the chair and the vice chair before we just make that decision.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Any other comments?
I think this is Commissioner Collette. I think again at the kickoff meeting we talked about brainstorming ideas for study sessions and other topics for the year, so that would be that would kick it off partially. But then of course there are other things that come up along the way. So it's going to be a full agenda for that retreat, I think.
Yeah, I am certainly hoping that we can have a full day like we've had in years past. I would know more if I'd actually attended that session, unfortunately. But anyway, all right, well, if there's no more for the calendar, any final comments by commissioners before we adjourn?
Well, this is Commissioner Bryan. Just in light of that comment about the full agenda and the comment also about canceling February's meeting, maybe, it just consider the possibility of using the February meeting for something that helps us prepare ourselves for the retreat rather than cancel it. I don't know if that would help at all.
It just might. I think as the retreat planning committee meets next time, we can certainly take that into account.
It also could help if we had some appointments. Maybe they would be appointed by then. So could introduce them to our committee before the retreat. Fingers crossed, we'll get some appointments by then.
Yeah, right. This is Commissioner Collette. I think that was the other thing that we talked about was, and I think we did this at last year's retreat, or the pre-work questions for people to, to work on before the retreat. And there might be some iteration of that, in a study session could help either develop those pre-work questions or work through them in some way. And I don't know what that would look like exactly, but having having that time as a group to make our retreat as productive as possible, that might be useful.
I agree. Any final comments from staff? Nope. Okay. Well, in that case, I would, sorry, it's been a while. Do we motion to adjourn or do we just all do thumbs up?
Yes, someone could motion to adjourn, and hand raising is acceptable for the vote.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. In that case, I will accept a motion to adjourn our January meeting.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I move to adjourn our meeting.
All in favor?
Sorry, wait, do we need a second?
Yeah, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it would be
Sorry.
great if someone could second that, and then
And this is
Commissioner
Commissioner Collette, I
Baltusca.
second it.
That's a lot of good
Second
seconds.
motion.
Okay. In that case, all in favor, please raise your hand. All right. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to a productive 2022. Have a good evening.
Thank
thank
you.
you.